Good afternoon. We're at the appointed time, so we shall begin. Hello, my name is Martin Hansen, and I'm a member of the American Society of Civil Engineers, or ASCE for short, the Wisconsin section. This presentation is being brought to you by ASCE Wisconsin section and the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin. We're pleased you have taken time to attend our Invest in Wisconsin infrastructure event and hope that you find the information in this presentation enlightening. Our event today has three parts. We have two formal presentations. First, on the recently released 2020 ASCE Wisconsin Infrastructure Report Card, and second, comments on infrastructure spending in the state and national economy. And third, we will have a question and answer period with the presenters and an invited panel of guests from the ASCE Wisconsin Report Card Committee. But first, a couple words about logistics for today's event. We are using the Zoom webinar platform, so all attendees are currently muted. We will be using the Zoom Q&A feature to take questions, not the Zoom chat box that some of you may be more familiar with. The Q&A feature should be visible on your Zoom screen, and depending on your device, you may need to scroll your mouse over the top or bottom part of the Zoom window or tap your screen to bring up the Zoom screen menu. If you'd like to ask questions, you may enter your questions in that Q&A box at any time during the webinar. We will have time at the end of the presentation to address those and any other new questions. This event is being recorded and will be made available on the ASCE Wisconsin section YouTube channel. So let's begin. What do we mean by infrastructure anyway? It's a somewhat simple word, but it includes a variety of extremely important things that we depend on and often take for granted. It's the power generation and transmission that charged your phone last night. It's the water and sewer system that delivered your clean water and took away the dirty water when you got ready to start your day. It's the roads, bridges, and transit that may have helped you get to your destinations today or tonight. It's the waterways, ports, railroads, and airports that helped get your online orders delivered to you and products to your stores today. It's the landfills that collected your waste this week. And it's a lot more. But I think you get the point that multiple segments of infrastructure impact your life many times a day. Today we'll hear from two experts. Our first presentation will overview the 2020 Wisconsin Infrastructure Report Card prepared by ASCE Wisconsin. The second presentation will explore how infrastructure spending impacts the economy. And finally, as mentioned previously, we will have time for questions for our speakers and panel. So who is ASCE and what do they do? To answer those questions, I'd like to introduce Carl Sutter, ASCE Director, who will brief you on ASCE and the ASCE Wisconsin section.
Thank you, Marty. The American Society of Civil Engineers, or ASCE, as Marty has previously mentioned, is the oldest professional engineering organization in the United States. It is a not-for-profit society and was founded in 1852 in New York City. It is worldwide with over 150,000 members in 177 countries. It also consists of 9 institutes which specialize in specific areas of civil engineering. These institutes are architectural engineering, coasts, oceans, ports, and rivers, construction, engineering mechanics, environmental and water resources, geotechnical, structural, transportation and development, and utility engineering and surveying. The Wisconsin section of ASCE was established in 1923. It comprises most of the state, with the exception of the area near Superior, and consists of 4 branches and 1,886 members. ASCE works to raise awareness of the need to maintain and modernize the nation's infrastructure using sustainable and resilient practices advocates for increasing and optimizing investment in infrastructure, and improve engineering knowledge and competency. Civil engineers are global leaders, building a better quality of life. Our society mission is to provide essential value to our members and partners, advance civil engineering, and serve the public good. Our code of ethics lists that engineers, first and foremost, protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public. This presentation is part of our advocacy and education effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Next, I'd like to introduce Carol Diggleman from the League of Women Voters, who will brief you on her organization.
Thank you, Marty. The League of Women Voters is happy to welcome you to today's event. We are a nonpartisan organization and are involved with this because we were invited and are concerned about our infrastructure as well. The country, US, has a population of over 330 million people, 80% living in urban areas. Citizens, communities, businesses need a fully functioning and well-maintained infrastructure to support the economy and our quality of life. Next slide. The League of Women Voters is nonpartisan, neither supporting nor opposing candidates or political parties. We are inclusive. We support diversity, equity, and inclusion. The policy is on our website. We are multi-issue. We have positions on government, social policy, and natural resources. We base these policies on what members have agreed on, and we study the issues before establishing positions. And political, we advocate on issues based on our positions. We're 101 years old this year, celebrating our centennial last year. Next, please. This is a map of Wisconsin with the local leagues noted on here. We're statewide, almost 3,000 members in local leagues, and we urge you to find a local league near you if you would, and we'd welcome your membership. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Our first presenter this afternoon is Carl Sutter. Carl is a senior vice president at McMahon Associates in Neenah, Wisconsin. Carl's been and currently is very active in ASCE, having served in a number of local, state, and national offices, and is currently serving as a region director. Carl will give an overview of the 2020 Wisconsin Infrastructure Report Card that was released in September of 2020.
Thank you for attending the American Society of Civil Engineers presentation of the 2020 Wisconsin Infrastructure Report Card in conjunction with the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin. This report card was prepared by over 35 volunteer civil engineers. I'm going to review this rather quickly so you can get an overview of where we currently stand as a state. ASCE has assessed Wisconsin's infrastructure and it earned an overall grade of C, a mediocre grade. We can do better, and we strive to reach a B grade. Some of our recommendations to increase this grade include increase overall investment across all infrastructure sectors to ensure safe, resilient, and reliable systems to maintain and improve the quality of life and economic health for Wisconsin residents. Leadership at all levels must have targeted discussions and build consensus to facilitate necessary updates for outdated infrastructure based on the needs of Wisconsinites.
Along with increased investments, efficiencies and new technologies can help bridge the gap between smart investment and overall infrastructure needs, encourage new methods of design and construction, and defray costs while providing for a better future for Wisconsin. Project priorities should be set for investment in the state's most outdated and overcapacity infrastructure needs. And please remember that delayed improvement and maintenance results in greater costs in the long run. This slide depicts the 13 infrastructure categories that we evaluated to provide the C grade. As you can see, the grades range from a high of B for energy to a low of D+ for roads and transit. The grading criteria is the same as in the old-style school report card. Each category is graded on capacity. Does the infrastructure's capacity meet current and future needs? Condition. What is the infrastructure's existing and near future physical condition? Funding. What is the current level of funding from all levels of the infrastructure category as compared to the estimated need? Future need. What is the cost to improve the infrastructure? Will future funding prospects address the need? Operation and maintenance. What is the owner's ability to operate and maintain the infrastructure properly? Is the infrastructure in compliance with government regulations? Public safety. To what extent is the public safety jeopardized by the condition of the infrastructure, and what could be the consequences of failure? Resilience. What is the infrastructure system's capacity to prevent or protect against significant multi-hazard threats and incidents? How able is it to quickly recover and reconstitute critical services with minimum consequences for public health and safety, the economy, and national security? Innovation. What new and innovative techniques, materials, technologies, and delivery methods are being implemented to improve the infrastructure? The grading scale is as follows. A, exceptional, fit for the future. The infrastructure in the system or network is generally in excellent condition, typically new or recently rehabilitated, and meets capacity needs for the future. A few elements show signs of general deterioration that require attention. Facilities meet modern standards for functionality and are resilient to withstand most disasters and severe weather events. B, good, adequate for now. The infrastructure in the system or network is in good to excellent condition. Some elements show signs of general deterioration that require attention. A few elements exhibit significant deficiencies. Safe and reliable with minimal capacity issues and minimal risk. C, mediocre, requires attention. The infrastructure in the system or network is in fair to good condition. It shows general signs of deterioration and requires attention. Some elements exhibit significant deficiencies in conditions and functionality, with increasing vulnerability to risk. D, poor, at risk. The infrastructure is in poor to fair condition and mostly below standard, with many elements approaching the end of their service life. A large portion of the system exhibits significant deterioration. Condition and capacity are of significant concern with strong risk of failure. F, failing, critical, unfit for purpose. The infrastructure in the system is in unacceptable condition with widespread signs of deterioration. Many of the components of the system exhibit signs of imminent failure. Now, let's review the individual categories. Aviation is an integral part of Wisconsin's transportation system, moving people and goods throughout the state, nation, and world. We have 8 commercial airports and 90 general aviation airports. Recently, commercial airlines transported more than 5.5 million passengers annually to and from Wisconsin. In general, Wisconsin's commercial aviation airports meet or exceed standards. 90% of airport pavement on primary runways and taxiways are rated fair or above. In the most recent 5-year capital improvement plan, Wisconsin's airports have identified a need of $1.13 billion from 2019 to 2025. Airport owners need to be able to finance a portion of their projects find new revenue options, and utilize reliable, robust federal funding to meet future needs. In addition to the recommendations shown on the slide, we propose the following to raise the grade in aviation. Increase federal and state funding to allow for new pavement and maintenance to be reliably scheduled. Investigate the resilience of the Wisconsin aviation system in the wake of more frequent and severe weather events, such as flooding and snowstorms. Plan to have the Wisconsin State Airport System Plan completed or updated on a regular basis to ensure that the state airports stay on top of any necessary changes. Bridges. Wisconsin's 14,275 bridges provide the state with critical infrastructure connecting residents with their jobs, schools, businesses, and places of worship, as well as hospitals and other emergency response services. 7.4% of our bridges are structurally deficient. The national average is 7.6%. That means we still have over 1,000 bridges that are structurally deficient. A 2019 report by the American Road and Transportation Builders Association identifies 1,955 bridges that require repair with an estimated cost of $1.4 billion. Developing policy solution and alternative project delivery methods, as well as utilizing advanced high-performance materials for bridge construction and repair to assist with cost savings are all crucial steps. Finally, the state should utilize Wisconsin's asset management system to increase bridge restoration efforts. In addition to the recommendations shown on the slide, ASCE proposes the following to raise the grade. Continue use of advanced materials for bridge rehabilitation and for new bridges. These include high-performance concrete and epoxy-coated and stainless steel reinforcement. Dams. Dams in Wisconsin provide recreational areas, fish and other wildlife habitat, hydroelectric power, a water source for agricultural operations, navigation, wetland restoration, and flood control. We have approximately 3,900 dams, of which nearly 200 are high hazard dams, meaning probable loss of life should the dam fail. The annual Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources budget for dam safety is approximately $750,000, which allows for 6.25 full-time equivalent staff. However, increased resources are needed to ensure public safety and minimize economic impact from possible future dam failures. In addition to the recommendations shown on the slide, we propose the following to raise the grade in dams. Educate the public about the location and the safety risk and hazard associated with the dams. Drinking water. Wisconsin has more than 11,000 public water systems to serve residents, which is among the largest amount in the nation. More than 80% of these are in areas where people don't remain for long periods, such as campgrounds or gas stations, while 5% serve more than 4 million residents. In general, municipalities and water utilities are encountering several natural and man-made water quality issues and must contend with aging water treatment and distribution systems to serve their communities in the future. Lead, bacteria, nitrates, per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS, arsenic, and radium are some of the water quality concerns that have come to light in recent years. It is estimated that $8.6 billion will be needed to address infrastructure deficiencies over the next 2 decades. Increased investment in drinking water infrastructure is needed to ensure customers have better access to safe and reliable water supply for future generations. In addition to the recommendations shown on the slide, ASCE proposes the following to raise the grade. Expand and strengthen the Safe Drinking Water Loan Program, increase principal forgiveness and private lead service line funding and opportunities, and streamline and reduce federal requirements to encourage participation. Encourage utilities to investigate water conservation and efficiency measures, including implementing uniform or increasing block rate structures and performing water audits. Adopt innovative technologies to improve maintenance, reduce water loss, enhance productivity, and reduce life cycle costs. Energy. Wisconsin's utilities provide energy to commercial, industrial, and residential ratepayers throughout the state. The mix of electrical power generation continues to evolve with new gas-fired plants, wind power, and utility-scale solar power compensating for the retirement of coal-powered plants. In general, Wisconsin's energy needs will be met through 2024. Energy shortages are unlikely, but would occur if plans for additional transmission and generation needs are not fulfilled in the future. Rate increases are common in Wisconsin, and the current average retail electricity rate is 10.58 cents per kilowatt hour, higher than the Midwest and national averages. However, this additional funding is directed towards needed capital projects for generation, distribution, and transmission. Utilities and government agencies are working to develop consensus greenhouse gas emission goals and the required infrastructure to attain them. Plans for power generation must consider future demand as well as public concern for the environment. Wisconsin must continue to pursue a strong energy policy that serves economic needs and preserves the environment. In addition to the recommendations shown on the slide, we propose the following to raise the grade in energy. Continue to reduce greenhouse gas production through conservation, renewables, nuclear and lower carbon dioxide producing fuels like natural gas. Continue to research and develop clean coal, energy storage, and carbon capture technologies. Continue to broaden the diversity of future fuel sources. Work with all stakeholders to create a workable 2050 plan for greenhouse gas reductions, including commitments to defined milestone objectives along the way. Increase diligence and preparedness to avert and recover from potential cyber attacks. Improve the reliability and redundancy of system controls and communications, along with blocking of directed cyber intrusions. Assure the reliability of imported energy supplies contractually and by transmission reliability and redundancy. Support transportation fuel efficiency by improving electric vehicle charging convenience and providing incentives for efficient vehicles. Wisconsin has been a leader in hazardous waste cleanup, brownfields, and emerging contaminant issues. The partnership between the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency ensures cleanup of contamination from hazardous waste and polychlorinated biphenyl through the One Cleanup program. Of the EPA's 1,178 national priority list sites, 36, or 3.1%, are in Wisconsin. More than 3/4 of those sites, or 28, are progressing toward being delisted. The state of Wisconsin has been proactive to protect and preserve the environment from hazardous waste. Establishing and maintaining funding along with prioritizing sites with the highest risk to the health and safety of the public are the primary concerns regarding hazardous waste sites in Wisconsin. In addition to the recommendations shown on the slide, ASCE supports the following recommendations to raise the grade. Provide responsible parties access to funds to support cleanup at contaminated sites based on a suite of factors such as financial need, records of operation and maintenance, and risk prioritization. Look for additional resources to decrease the backlog claims for the Dry Cleaner Environment Response Fund. Inland waterways consist of the navigation channels and associated structures that support commercial transport of materials between ports, terminals, or other locations. The major inland waterway in Wisconsin is the Mississippi River, consisting of 213 miles of navigation channels. In 2017, 25.8 million tons of cargo was transported over barges on this freight highway, consisting primarily of iron ore, steel scraps, and food products. Wisconsin's locks and dams along the inland waterway are beyond the intended end of their design life. Targeted funding allowing component replacement has kept the locks and dams functional for the time being. However, increased frequency of scheduled and unscheduled maintenance has contributed to decreased system performance, and major rehabilitation of these structures is needed to ensure long-term durability. Since 2011, The percentage of vessels experiencing delay has increased from 6% to 35%, and the average delay per lockage increased from 20 to 70 minutes. Fortunately, additional revenue sources, including public-private partnerships, are being considered to support investments to inland waterway infrastructure in Wisconsin. In addition to the recommendations shown on the slide, we recommend the following to raise the grade. Considering allowing the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers contract authority for projects or some other appropriate mechanism to avoid the stop and start of construction currently happening because of the appropriations process. Ensure full utilization of the Inland Waterways Trust Fund by providing matching federal appropriations and increase the funding of operations and maintenance of the inland waterways each year. Utilize alternative financing and delivery methods, such as public-private partnerships when appropriate. Wisconsin's port facilities range from simple harbors to multimodal distribution hubs, with transport using Great Lakes, rivers, roads, rail, and air routes. Wisconsin is home to 20 harbors, including 8 major ports, including the shared Superior, Wisconsin, Duluth, Minnesota port. The ports of Wisconsin support approximately 10,000 jobs and generated more than $1.6 billion annually in economic activity. The overall condition of Wisconsin's major ports is adequate for the demands currently placed on the state, but facilities will require adequate funding to install, replace, or maintain safe infrastructure. In addition to the recommendations shown on the slide, ASCE supports the following to raise the grade. Preparing for ports, harbors, and inland waterways to accommodate the newest generation of ships, particularly as more smart features are developed. Enhance Wisconsin's utilization of federal grant programs, such as the Infrastructure for Rebuilding America, better utilizing investments to leverage development, and the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. Streamlining the project permitting process for port infrastructure improvements. Wisconsin encompasses more than 115,000 miles of drivable roadways. About 14,000 miles of these roadways are interstate and state highways. More than 1/3 of these roads are in fair or below condition, and deterioration is likely to continue over the next 10 years. If additional funding is not provided, 50% of the roads may experience increasing pavements rated at poor or below. More than 2/3 of major roads concentrated in urban areas were rated as fair or below in roadway condition. Deficient roads cost drivers $6 billion annually due to wear and tear on vehicles, wasted fuel due to congestion, and the overall cost of crashes on roadways. There is an estimated $13 billion shortfall over the next decade if roadway improvements are not funded. Roadway features in Wisconsin are likely a contributing factor in approximately 1/3 of fatal traffic crashes. This is tremendously significant to drivers on rural roadways throughout the state, where the fatality rate doubles the national average. In addition to the recommendations shown on the slides, we support the following steps to raise the grade. Increase the federal government investment while pursuing a more efficient and sustainable funding system at the state level. Develop a more balanced maintenance, rehabilitation, and reconstruction approach to the state's roadways to provide the optimum cost-effective lifestyle for pavement structures. Wisconsin's maintenance spending per lane mile is relatively low, while capital and administrative spending per lane mile are quite high. Municipal solid waste is generated by Wisconsin households, businesses, and other institutions. The amount of municipal solid waste generated per person in Wisconsin is consistent with the national average rate of approximately 5 pounds per person per day. The predominant method for managing municipal solid waste in the state is landfilling. Landfills generally have sufficient capacity and are in good condition, a result of robust state regulatory oversight. Combined recycling and composting rates in the state are comparable to national averages at approximately 1/3 of waste generated. Recycling programs rely on revenue from the sale of recyclables, prices of which are driven by volatile international markets that are currently at historically low values. Recycling rates have stagnated in recent years, and municipal recycling programs could benefit from increased state funding. A balance between economic, social, and environmental impacts is needed for all solid waste management efforts to succeed in the future. In addition to the recommendations shown on the slide, ASCE supports the following to raise the grade. The complex and diverse nature of waste, waste generators, and waste management options, coupled with a mixture of public and private involvement, presents significant challenges to gathering reliable data. Wisconsin should increase efforts to collect, analyze, and openly distribute key municipal solid waste statistics, such as waste generated per person, recycling as a percentage of waste generated, and waste disposition, that is, percentage that is landfilled, recycled, composted, or combusted, following the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency facts and figures approach. This data is needed to educate the public, track progress, and shape future decisions. Waste reduction efforts by all generators, residential, commercial, institutional, and industrial, will result in less stress on the overall structure and less impact on the environment. Reduction is at the top of waste management hierarchy. If waste is not generated, it does not require management. Combined recycling and composting rates in the state have stagnated for several years at an estimated rate of approximately 1/3 of total waste generated, which is consistent with national averages. Continued efforts to increase the collected efficiency of recyclable materials, especially those with higher market values such as aluminum containers and numbers 1 and 2 plastics, and to avoid landfilling such materials, will provide many benefits. The estimated value of disposed, that is, recyclables exceeds $100 million annually. It is estimated that less than 1/2 of many easily recyclable items, such as aluminum cans, plastic bottles, and steel cans, are actually recycled. The establishment of state and/or local recycling goals is encouraged. Solid waste management infrastructure is largely market-driven. As such, decisions are most often made on an economic basis. Increasingly, the desire for sustainable solutions requires an evaluation of economic, environmental, and social impacts, often termed the triple bottom line. A balance among these three factors is needed to proceed with sustainable solid waste management in the future. Stormwater runoff and the subsequent effect of its volume, intensity, and associated pollutant loading continues to challenge Wisconsinites and our way of life. Wisconsin is home to 15,000 inland lakes and impoundments, 53,000 streams, about 200 miles of boundaries on the Mississippi River, nearly 2,700 miles of trout streams, and more than 1,000 miles of Great Lakes coastline, including 192 beach miles. The quality of these natural resources depends in large part on the state's stormwater infrastructure. Presently, 120 Wisconsin municipalities have implemented stormwater utilities to fund their local stormwater programs. Annual utilities generally collect between $10 and $150 per year on average from single-family homes, with the average payment approximately $60 per year. Bolstering funding levels of these municipal stormwater utilities is also key to improving our grade. Adequate funding through utilities, grants, and other programs, and effective use of those funds is critical towards success of all systems. Additionally, the state should closely rate and monitor the condition of natural waterways and utilize data and research to budget effectively and efficiently. In addition to the recommendations shown on the slide, we recommend the following to raise the stormwater grade. Bolster the funding level of municipal stormwater utilities to allow for more sustainable management of our regional best management practices across Wisconsin. Efficient transit service is a major component of a multimodal transportation system and a key to public safety, commerce, and easing congestion. In Wisconsin, transit takes on many forms, ranging from urban fixed-route bus transit systems to rural taxi service. For many, that means alternative means of transportation to work, school, and recreation, filling a critical transportation need for transit-dependent people. Unfortunately, funding challenges from federal, state, and local entities present public transit systems in Wisconsin with tremendous financial hurdles to overcome. In addition to the recommendations shown on the slide, ASCE supports the following to raise the grade. Incorporate transit initiatives into land use and transportation planning, including larger service areas, maximize accessibility, and linkages between jobs and supporting workforces. Include high-speed bus and rail corridors and other transit travel time enhancements in transportation to help make transit the travel mode of choice and to reduce congestion and improve safety in primary travel corridors. Wastewater. Wisconsin's municipal utilities are facing challenges due to aging infrastructure, growth, and new wastewater discharge regulations. The estimated future needs for municipal wastewater infrastructure maintenance and upgrades for Wisconsin total $6.3 billion. Utilities are raising rates to cover necessary costs and to combat dwindling grant funding. In Wisconsin, the average annual rate increase of nearly 5% is higher than the national average. However, the true cost of service is often still not reflective of raised rates. The highest rate increases occur in small rural communities of 1,000 to 2,000 residents. Meanwhile, approximately 25% of Wisconsin residents do not have access to sanitary sewers, mainly relying on on-site septic or other treatment systems. Municipalities and wastewater utilities will face significant capital costs to meet new phosphorus water quality standards for lakes, reservoirs, rivers, and streams. Collection and treatment systems are seeing the impacts of increased inflow and infiltration from more intense and frequent storm events due to climate change. Anticipated new regulatory requirements for previously undiscovered compounds like PFAS will also add to the financial burden on wastewater treatment facilities and ratepayers. In addition to the recommendations shown on the slide, we recommend the following to raise the grade. Permit holders may incur significant capital and operation expenses to achieve the water quality-based effluent criteria for phosphorus and microconstituents, which are at the practical limits of current technology. Planning is necessary for the physical facilities and financial needs for achieving these limits. The potential impacts of climate change, such as infiltration and inflow, may impact collection systems such that future capacity will be more difficult to predict and costly to address. Support efforts for public outreach on the value of water and wastewater services and provide incentives for source reduction. Utility rates should cover the full cost of service, including operation, maintenance, and capital needs. As you can see, Wisconsin's infrastructure still needs attention. You are now equipped to speak on each of the core areas of Wisconsin's infrastructure. For access to the complete Wisconsin 2020 Infrastructure Report Card, please visit infrastructurereportcard.org/state-item/Wisconsin as shown on this slide. I would also like to emphasize it's important to view infrastructure holistically in addition to each infrastructure category. As an example, greater use of ports to move freight or transit to move people results in decreased traffic for bridge and roads, increasing their efficiency and useful life. Again, thank you for your time and attention. Please feel free to ask questions on this at the conclusion of the economics presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Currently, there is an infrastructure bill in front of Congress, and of course, the state of Wisconsin is looking at the next state budget, which will include infrastructure spending. Now that you've got an idea of the different needs and some of the costs involved, you should be quite impressed by the large magnitude of those numbers. The next presenter is Dr. William Holohan from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Dr. Holohan holds a master's and a PhD in economics from Brown University. He's received numerous awards for his work in the classroom and has published papers in many economic journals. Dr. Holohan will discuss the effects of investing in infrastructure projects on the economy. Welcome, Dr. Holohan.
Hello, I'm Bill Holohan, and this is a short video on infrastructure spending in the state and national economy. It's going to be a little bit different than the engineering presentations because what I want to focus on is the role of spending and, of course, borrowing to pay for trillions of dollars worth of new public fixed assets that we can use going forward. The intent of this video is to present these economic concepts, show how the spending relates to recessions and expansions, borrowing, as well as debt and deficits, and to help build the case for infrastructure spending in the face of opposition on the that is based upon the already high national debt. There's a lot of misunderstanding about debt and deficits, and we don't want the confusion to hold up the spending that we want on these fixed assets. So fasten your seatbelts, because here is the core principle of macroeconomics. Courage, everyone. First of all, the common sense version is everyone's spending is someone else's income. That's pretty sensible when you think about it, but it needs to be pointed out so that we can put infrastructure spending and borrowing and so on into perspective. The big picture here is that all the goods, services, and assets, everything is one of these three: goods or services or assets. And all of those goods bought in the private market consists of three components. Consumption, that's about 70% of the total. Business investment, that's 9 or 10%. And net exports, that's the difference between what the nation exports minus what it imports. So consumption is represented by the letter C. Business investment is represented by the letter I, and net exports is X minus M. X for exports, E for M for imports. Add to all of that all the goods and services and assets bought by the government, which we represent by the letter G. That whole summation must equal in value the incomes of all the people who made all those goods, services, and assets. All that stuff. Another way to put it is national income equals national purchases in dollar value on both sides of the equation, okay? And the algebra version is the famous national income account equation. gross domestic product equals C plus I plus G plus net exports, X minus M. This is an accounting equation. It's not right or left wing. It's not capitalist or socialist or communist or vegetarian or anything other than the way any country has to keep track of the flow of income and purchases. Okay, now to break this down a little bit better, all spending becomes someone's income. Let's follow the money. We'll follow the money. When money is spent on infrastructure assets, which by the way is part of G, typically, income is earned by those who build, install, modernize, and repair those assets. So all the engineers, all the scientists, all the people, all the teamsters, and all those people who get involved in installing and repairing and maintaining infrastructure assets, they earn money doing so. They spend a large portion of that added income, the income added to their wallets, they spend a portion of that on their preferred goods and services. Those who provide those goods and services to these people, so when these people buy groceries and gasoline and pay the rent and so forth, these people earn additional income, which they then spend on their consumer preferences. So there's a round of spending here, there's a round of spending here, and these rounds of spending continue. These rounds add to total demand for goods and services, adding to jobs. If you're in a recession, this kind of spending will shorten the recession and make the recession less severe. So what we have then is a bit of a discursive version of that equation that we saw earlier. Meanwhile, when the infrastructure is in good working order, the economy operates with more well-functioning, long-lived, durable, however you want to say it, long-lived productive assets. If you go to the national income accounts, and who doesn't, these are called government fixed non-residential assets. When the infrastructure is in good shape, we have greater productivity and greater sustainability. In other words, we're not going to be putting in 1880 vintage infrastructure anymore. We're going to be putting in state-of-the-art infrastructure to replace obsolete and worn out infrastructure, and that's going to be more climate conserving. So, or sustainable is a word a lot of people use. In a recession, especially the one that has been induced by the pandemic, government spending is, consumer spending is way down, as we'll see here in a minute. That fall in C has induced a fall in business investment. So C and I tend to fall together. And then we have the government. Fiscal policy is an increase in G, purposely timed to offset the recession, purposely timed, in other words, to offset the fall in C plus I. And if it's focused on infrastructure, we get physical fixed assets that produce benefits long after the recession has gone away. So, in other words, increasing in the spending reduces the severity of the recession, reduces the duration of the recession, and invests in the post recession recovery. So, recessions are an excellent time to be investing in infrastructure. Monetary policy is the other major function of the government, and that is to cut interest rates to induce more spending. But as we're going to see here in a minute, those interest rates are already so low that there's very little extra power left in monetary policy. Reminder, infrastructure spending is part of G. It enhances productivity, okay? And it has that multiplier effect as consumers and businesses spend and respend the money. So that helps to offset the pandemic. Let's look at how bad the situation has become. Here we are in February of 2021. We had 153 million jobs in February of 2020, 1 year ago, when the trouble began. C+I fell tremendously, and then jobs fell very suddenly and historically never seen anything like it. A 21 million job loss in just 2 months, mostly in the month of March. So here we were, relative to February, we were down 21 million jobs. Then each month, each of these little step functions here is a month in which the jobs report, comes out first Friday of every month, 8:30 Eastern time, and we get the report. Well, we started to rebuild our job base at fairly rapid rates at first, but notice something. Each one of these stair steps is getting smaller. See, here we have a really big one, then a somewhat smaller one, smaller, 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 really small. And then in November, we actually lost jobs. Then in December, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a tiny, tiny increase here. And here's where we are now. We're down 9.9 million jobs relative to this dotted line, which is February of 2020. So the net result after a year has gone by, we're still down almost 10 million jobs. So horrible situation. Long-term unemployment, this is really important. Long-term means if you're unemployed, you've been, and long-term unemployed, 27 weeks or longer. 27 weeks or longer, a little over half a year. That's when skills evaporate. That's when lost opportunity to learn on the job and lost skills that were acquired in the past tend to depreciate. And so of the unemployed, 39.3 have been unemployed for 27 weeks or longer. Here's the unemployment rate. There's several different unemployment rates. This is what's called the headline unemployment rate. It's the one they report on the evening news or the all day long news. And And if you're familiar with government statistics, this is U3. U3. Anyway, and it includes all the people that are unemployed but still looking for a job to replace the one that they had lost or the one that they aspire to. You can see it's, of course, spiked when the pandemic hit, and it's been coming down, but it's still settling at around 6.3. And as you saw a couple slides ago, um, things are kind of leveling off at a very depressing uh, rate. Here now, some people have left the labor force altogether, which um, uh, reminds us that the labor force only includes those people that either have a job or are actively looking for a job. What if you have been so discouraged that you stop looking? The way you measure that is the percentage of people who are in the labor force as a fraction of the total population. And that is down to 61.4. It had been up as high as 63.5. So it's down almost 2 full percentage points. And that is a huge hunk of the population. It all comes back to GDP equals C plus I plus G, which I've exaggerated here to remind ourselves this is going to be a government function, um, plus X minus N. The government function is to help us uh, uh, get these assets built, maintained, repaired, and so on. Public infrastructure has been neglected. Now, the American Society of Civil Engineers 2017 report card has yielded this data. Um, the gray bar is estimated funding for this decade, 2016 to 2025. And we need $2 trillion. We have about half of that planned. And so the gap is this orange portion of the larger bar graph. Electricity doing a little bit better. Here's the estimated funding. Here is the gap. This is the gap. Now, I would urge you to realize if we get serious about climate, this bar graph is going to be much bigger. We're going to have to electrify much of what we do. Cars, heating, um, uh, trucks, delivery, things like that. Trains, moving to electric trains and away from diesel. And that is going to require a major increase in the electric grid. Also, the electric grid has to be completed. It doesn't cover the whole United States. And one of the most important gaps is between the Mississippi River going east and out to what is called the Wind Alley that starts in North Dakota and goes down to western Texas. That is an area where the wind never stops. And one of the problems with renewable energy, of course, is what happens when there's cloud cover. What happens if the wind doesn't blow? Well, you don't need to worry about that from North Dakota down to West Texas. And so that is where we're going to put an awful lot of wind generated electricity, but then we have to transport that electricity across to Chicago, St. Louis, Milwaukee, places like that, that will have to introduce that electricity into that grid. Also, if we get serious about climate, we're going to be decommissioning the coal-fired power plants and the and moving more toward uh, renewables backed up by lithium ion batteries. So this is going to be a much bigger deal in the years to come. Schools. School buildings are dilapidated in a lot of places, particularly urban and rural areas. If we want those kids to close the education gap, we're going to have to spend a lot of money and see that the planning is way behind the need. Waterways, ports, airports, you can see uh, the continuation. I was surprised to see airports is so small. Our domestic airports are way behind other countries who are major trading partners. Also, if we get serious about climate, we're going to have more rail, and so expect this bar graph to grow. All right, let's move on. The current report card, the 2021 report card on Wisconsin, is dismal. You'd never let your kid get away with grades like this. C plus for bridges, C plus for dams, C minus for drinking water, and essential for life itself. Ports, how do we compete globally if our ports cannot handle the freight? Roads, we know we're killing our cars on these neglected roads and potholes and so forth. And of course, public transit is a joke. All right, so what do we have here? We are borrowing money at very low interest rates. Very low interest rates. Maybe we can adjust this downward a little bit. Okay, so we can see it. Money borrowed at very low interest rates these days. We're going to borrow money for the infrastructure and for the COVID response and for helping people feed their families because the demand for in-person services and so-called essential workers way, way down. So we're going to be borrowing a lot of that money, and fortunately, interest rates are really low. This is a repeat. All spending is someone else's income, and so on. But it doesn't end there. Movement of goods and people, think of it as a productivity increase. Whenever productivity goes up, costs go down. When costs go down, the U.S. can compete more effectively in the world economy. When costs go down, U.S. jobs are enhanced because we can compete in terms of jobs with other countries. Travel time, travel safety are good examples of that. Internet capacity, really very important here in Wisconsin. Farmers need better connectivity, high speed, because farming these days requires you to be in instantaneous contact with the financial markets, as well as learning on webinars and so on of modern farm practices, irrigation practices, and so on. Same thing with dairy, misspelled word there, let's fix that. And of course, schools, urban and rural schools tend to be underinvested in broadband. Can't keep up with the world if in a school where that is the case. Public health. water quality, air quality, food safety. These are all resultants of that terrible report card. These are in jeopardy. Already talked about the electric grid. Okay, productivity is enhanced, recession less severe, productivity. But what about financing? The debt, where possible. Users of these assets should pay for their use. Wherever you have a road or a bridge or something like that, where the users can be identified and their use measured, you have the preconditions for user charges. And a user charge on bridges, roads, water, electricity, cable, internet use, and so on, forces people to think, is the benefit that I'm getting from using this asset enough to justify the cost which I have to pay? I don't get to get the benefit and have the general taxpayer pay for my usage. So that helps keep the budgets under control. Why doesn't the private sector handle infrastructure investment? The answer is these are public goods. These are goods that we have to share. These are so enormous that you can't have competition. You don't have competition in the sewer system, for example. So even though free markets require streets and roads and sewer and water and things like that, it won't produce them because if they did, they'd charge monopoly prices, then it'd have to be regulated. And the public sector does a pretty good job of regulating these basic public utilities. Anyway, for political reasons especially, they've moved into the public sector. So we have public roads, we have public water, we have public flood control, disaster relief, things like that. It's pretty hard to get a private return on investment in these areas. State dollars and borrowing pay for most infrastructure projects. State dollars, and this is, people think it all comes from the federal government. More of it probably should, because the federal government can borrow at lower interest rates. States can only borrow or issue bonds if there are some kind of designated funding to repay the bonds. And then you have dedicated fees and things like that, tolls and whatnot, and general funds, income taxes and so on, unrelated to use. State and local governments own the vast majority of public capital. Vast majority. You can see in dark orange, $10.6 trillion in 2017. And the federal government has a much smaller share of these fixed assets. So we have to worry about the debt. National debt's already high. It's going to get higher. Here's how you measure the burden of the debt. You divide the debt by GDP. It's currently 106%. The all-time high was 112% right after World War II. This 106 is going to go up. Fight the pandemic. We're not taxing enough to come anywhere close to balancing the budget. So of course it's going to go up. If we grow the denominator of GDP, that means that we grow our way out of the debt, which is exactly what we did after World War II. We brought that 112 down to about 33% before the debt started to go up under President Reagan. If we build productivity enhancing public assets, i.e. infrastructure, then future taxpayers will inherit both financial debt and those assets. So you can think of it as double entry bookkeeping, where on one side, here's the letter L, you have liabilities. On the other side, you have assets and liabilities. Think about both sides when you want to borrow to invest in infrastructure. You get greater productivity and competitiveness. This supports after-tax income growth, which makes it more feasible to bring down the national debt as a fraction of GDP. So the engineers have another report called the cost of doing nothing, as opposed to spending a trillion or two. Actually, you will be giving the future a better deal if you hand them well-functioning public fixed assets to go with the debt. They will actually be richer, not poorer, if you do that. One final thing, here's the national federal debt as a percentage of gross domestic product. And you can see it's rising and rising and rising. Here's where it jumped into the Trump administration due to the pandemic, basically. And so here we are, very high. You'd expect that would drive up interest rates and cause a great deal of consternation in the markets. Just the opposite happened. Rates are down. These are 10-year Treasury constant maturity rate bonds. And you can see that those rates are down despite the skyrocketing debt. Can't go on forever, but there is no one-to-one relationship between debt and interest rates. So we have expected reaction to additional federal borrowing. One is we're spending money we don't have. Well, of course, when you borrow money, you are spending money you don't have. That's why you borrow it. We're borrowing from our grandchildren. Well, we're actually borrowing from each other. We're borrowing from savers who want some kind of an investment. They've basically decided worldwide that U.S. Treasury securities are about the safest thing they can invest in. So we're really not borrowing from our grandchildren. They will have to pay back, but they get assets to work with to help them pay it back. We're actually making them richer, not poorer. So this is bogus. We will suffer inflation. It's nowhere in sight. If it does rear its ugly head, the Federal Reserve tries to shoot for about 2% inflation. They've been under that for years, and we will see, and they can tighten when and if that time comes. But as Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, used to be the head of the Federal Reserve, chairperson of the Federal Reserve, she said the other day that there's much greater danger in undershooting this spending than overshooting. And if inflation does materialize, we can deal with it at that time. We will become Venezuela. That's another thing you'll hear. It's absolutely ridiculous. Um, it's a highly socialist country. It's not a competitive market like we have. And it's reliant heavily on oil, which is, of course, um, uh, uh, going down in value as we switch to renewables. Drive up interest rates, thus crowding out business investment and growth. Well, as we saw in that earlier graph, that isn't happening either. So let's build that infrastructure, but get ready. There are very good reasons uh, for continuing. These are not um, coherent objections, but be ready to answer those. Thank you for your time. There will be a question period to follow this. I'll turn it back now to the moderator who will get the question and answer underway.
Thank you, Dr. Halhan. Appreciate your report. As a reminder, you can enter questions in the Zoom Q&A box. The Q&A box can be found on the Zoom screen menu. And depending on your device, you should be able to bring up the Zoom screen menu by scrolling your mouse over the top or bottom of the Zoom window or tapping on your tablet screen. But before we get to questions, we'd like to invite you to participate in 2 quick polls. The first poll question asks you to pick up to 3 infrastructure segments that are of most concern to you after hearing our presentation today. There are 10 options to choose from. You may have to scroll your screen down to see all the choices, and I'll give you about a minute to make your selections. So select 3 that you feel are most concerned to you, and then be sure that you click on the Submit button on the bottom of the poll screen in order to register your results. And I will give you a chance to see how the poll turns out here in a minute. We'll go a little bit more. We've got about 70% of the people have selected. Remember the top 3 that are most concerned to you. And be sure to hit the Submit button on the bottom of the poll. Okay, I'm going to close the poll and share the results with you. You can see the top 2 were transportation and water resources. We grouped transportation, roads, bridges, and transit all together. And then water resources would be dams, levees, and drinking water. And it looks like energy came in 3rd place there. Our second poll question talks about broadband or internet access. We'd like to have you assess broadband in your area. Please pick one of the 6 answers. Give you about a minute to make that selection, and then again, be sure you hit the blue Submit button on the bottom. We'll probably see different results here depending on which quadrant of the state we're giving this presentation in. We're currently in southeast, so it's a more populated area of the state. It looks like the voting has slowed down. I'll give you another 10 seconds here. And here's the results. So 43% felt it was good, and we've got about 67% that are in the good or very good category. So things are pretty good. We don't have anybody in the not available, so surprised at that, except you couldn't attend today's session unless you had access or went to a different site to do that. So I will go to the questions here, but first I want to invite our panel to join the presentation stage here by turning on their cameras and microphones. If you could please do so. To answer your questions, we have our presenters, Carl Sutter and Dr. Holohan, and we're also joined by Jake Brunailer, Ken Micah, and Jennifer Schaff, who were all members of the 2020 Wisconsin Infrastructure Report Card Committee. I will moderate the questions here, and the first question we have is from Ann, and it's for Dr. Holohan. It's a rather long question. Let me get through it, Doctor, and then you can comment as you see fit. The question starts out, could we get private corporations to pay for some of the infrastructure they profit from? Electric companies pass on fewer customers to the customer. Google and Facebook pay for broadband and maintenance. How do we justify subsidies for oil companies? Dr. Holohan, your reaction?
Well, first reaction is how much time do you have? The corporate taxes have fallen in the 2017 tax cut plan under the Trump administration. And we could probably foresee corporate income taxes going up, back up again. The user charge concept is very important here, because if a corporation ships a lot of its product over the streets and roads or rail that we have, if they were paying per unit of transportation value and transportation cost, including an amortization of the facility as well as the marginal cost or user variable costs that are incurred anytime a major 18-wheeler goes down the road, then it would be very advantageous, because the transportation cost would then be incorporated in the product price, and they would have to compete on that basis, and it would induce some shifting from concrete pavement over to rail, so that heavy freight would be shifted more toward barge lanes and rail, and we'd have a more efficient combination of our transportation if we instituted user charges, and that'd be very valuable. The damage to roads actually rises, this is unbelievable, but to the 4th power of the weight of the vehicle, which means that an 18-wheeler traffic down a freeway is going to do much more damage than thousands and thousands of cars that basically float over the road. So yes, user charges, income taxes would be good improvements. Broadband installation is a couple of questions here on broadband. Broadband is in rural areas and in the poorer areas of cities tends to be way behind the trend, way behind the cutting edge. This is very damaging for modern schooling, for modern farming, modern dairy farming, and so forth. And this is an area which we should definitely improve. Subsidies for oil companies, it's a big part of our problem. We're actually encouraging the fossil fuel use that is creating the emissions that warm up the planet. So we're actually subsidizing the destruction of our habitat. And if we could reverse that and subsidize the renewables while we get rid of the fossil fuel subsidies, then we would be using economics in a way that benefits us rather than harms us. So that I think covers all of that. That was quite a long question, wasn't it?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Holohan.
Back
Jennifer,
to you.
you were co-chair of the infrastructure committee, and we had to pick certain categories that we were going to include in our report. We're unable to do all categories. In particular, some people are wondering why we didn't include broadband, and maybe you could also expand that answer as to why we did not include schools in our report.
Marty, is that question for me or for Jake? Sorry.
For you, Jennifer, sorry.
Oh, okay, sure, no problem. So we are a group of volunteers that put the report card together. And so looking over the group that we had that were volunteering, we needed to refine the number of categories for infrastructure that we're looking to do. Education was one category where we didn't feel like there was enough reporting on educational infrastructure to be able to do a really good job with our chapter in the report. So that one we found would probably be something we should put off until more information was available. Broadband would be another one where down the road, perhaps we look at including that as well. But it really is looking at putting together a good product, a good end report card, and making sure that we have the staff to be able to do that. And again, we're volunteers.
Thank you, Jennifer. I would just add to that just yesterday, the national group for American Society of Civil Engineers released their infrastructure report card on America, which is the entire country. The overall grade was a C minus. It was the first time in 20 years it's been above a D. So we do have a small incremental improvement there. But that report card did include, as I recall, broadband and schools in their report cards. So you certainly can Google that and read information about what the national group assessed for that.
I should did add stormwater this year. We haven't covered that chapter before. So that would be, we did try to expand our categories.
Very good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Holohan, back to you. I have a question from Ann. What is the greatest impediment currently to infrastructure spending? And I guess I would expand on that question a little bit by asking, I'm quite familiar with road funding and the bonding part of that infrastructure segment. How much bonding is too much, or can we bond for the entire program?
Well, I think the major impediment is the failure to raise the gasoline tax, it's a fairly accurate user charge. An equivalent tax for heavy trucks, I think, could be raised as well. And then you finance it through users, and then any bonding that you need to pay upfront costs of major capital expenditures could be tied to the user charges, which would then repay the bonds, and you have that asset liability combination again, so that you can almost treat it like a standalone piece of your economy. In other words, outside of your general budget deficit or surplus. This would stand alone because you're essentially using the user charges to pay for any capital borrowing that you do. The major impediment, who asked this? Ann
Yes.
Batiza. The major impediment is just a terrible understanding of economics. There is no excuse for it. People they call themselves conservative. I don't know why, but the idea that you can't raise taxes to pay for things that you need is almost like going into a grocery store and saying, I don't want to spend any money. How much food are you going to walk out with? I mean, it's crazy. And particularly since the users are easily identified, their use is relatively easily measured. We could do even better with modern electronic measurement devices and geopositioning and things like that. But the good old-fashioned gasoline tax is pretty workable. Electric cars are coming, so we're going to have to come to some kind of mileage fee that could be measured and recorded over transponders. But we could easily adjust to get a per unit cost recovery from electric cars, probably eventually even more accurately than the gasoline tax. So it's that's the major impediment. We're just being foolish.
Yeah, I would just add to that Wisconsin has not raised the fuel tax since 1997,
Right.
and the federal government has not raised the gas tax since 1993. So you're entirely correct that we've just been sitting on our hands there. And as we move towards potentially a mileage-based tax, it can be more variables than just mileage. We could do time of day.
Right.
To your point about the higher damage of roads to heavier vehicles, it could be based on weight. There's all kinds of different variables we could add to that equation to try and better equate the use and benefit for the traffic. Jake, I'm going to toss a question over to you. The question is from Bruce, and he's asking, has there been any analysis of which pieces of infrastructure could be paid through user fees? And of course, we're talking maybe by mileage fees on the road system, but isn't stormwater moving towards that way a little bit also?
Exactly. I was just saying, I was hoping you'd call me for that one. So there are several different ways that besides just increasing taxes and user fees. Take our stormwater utilities, for instance. If you ever look over your municipal utility bill with a little finer tooth comb, many, especially in our major municipalities, you will see a stormwater utility fee, and it's usually very reasonable. If you read the report, I think it ranges between $10 and $150 per household per year, with an average being about $60. And that goes towards assessment, operation, and maintenance of regional stormwater facilities. And so there's all kinds of funding mechanisms that can mirror that. And even within, I would say, even within transportation, I think there's municipalities across the state that are really taking a hard look at even some of those kind of, like an assessed trip generation fee, like, a restaurant or something like that. Say they average this many vehicles in and out of their property every day, and then they would assess, funding based on trip generation fees. So I think there's all kinds of different ways that we can look at this. There's been studies done. Marty, I think you were even part of some transportation funding studies that have been done multiple times that we're trying to figure out ways to make it fair and equitable and just for across any of these segments. But stormwater certainly has been, we'll say, kind of a leader in one of those, kind of mirroring with drinking water and wastewater.
Thanks, Jake. Ken, question for you. Peggy is asking that the audience chose their priorities for infrastructure spending in our first poll question. Among ASCE members, or I guess we could broaden that to the engineering community, is there a consensus on priorities?
Well, Well, first off, unfortunately, ASCE doesn't look at specific priorities. We just look at infrastructure as a whole. That there's, several areas of infrastructure. Obviously, Wisconsin looked at, I believe, 13, and the national one looked at 17. But based on what we're seeing, we definitely need to work and improve infrastructure spending, obviously on roads, bridges, and transit. Those were some of our lower grades. Wastewater facilities as well, and drinking water. So in all reality, we need to spend money across all infrastructure at this point. There's a couple grades in Wisconsin specifically that came in at B, which is, where we would like to see them. They're meeting today's current needs, and they're as well meeting future needs for a couple of years. And so that's really where we'd like to see things. So for pretty much anything in Wisconsin, it's anything that had a C or a D as a grade from the 2020 report card.
Yeah. Ken, if I could add in on that too, the poll question is great. If you asked me from a holistic view, it almost seems like we asked a trick question, just because infrastructure does function so holistically. As one particular segment fails, it'll ripple through other segments. Say if your stormwater conveyance system begins to falter, it's going to start to have ripple effects on downstream systems. Plus, it's going to impact your surface level infrastructure, where if we've got potholes at the surface, it's never very tough. It's never very tough to find sources of that. And a lot of times it can be in our underground utilities that are causing those issues at the surface. Same with ports and rail. If we're struggling with an energy grid that's not able to be reliable, our dams are going to struggle. Our drinking, as we saw in Texas, drinking water becomes a huge issue if we have struggles with the energy grid. So as much as you might see different price points for any one of those given infrastructure segments, they're so interdependent and reliant upon each other. It's really hard to kind of choose one.
Thanks, Jake. We are getting a lot of questions. I appreciate that. I'm not sure we'll be able to get to all of them, so I'm trying to pick the ones with the broadest interest here. We did get a comment from an attendee that said they expected the presentation to focus more specifically on Southeast Wisconsin. Carol, would you want to talk about how we designed the quadrant strategy here for these presentations?
Yes. The League of Women Voters and ASCE spent several months in discussions. And in the past, ASCE actually moved the meetings around the state, it's my understanding. And this year, with virtual only meetings, we decided that to have the presentations of Carl and Bill taped, so that people, those tapes are available for anyone who wants to watch them. And they will be stored on both ASCE's website, or no, I guess, Marty, you said earlier, it's on the YouTube, ASCE YouTube video site. So those tapes are available, and they will have the same information for everyone watching the overview presentations, which is what we had today.
Thanks, Carol. Carol will also be talking about some infrastructure segment meetings that we have planned coming up in the future too, just before we close out the meeting today. Dr. Holohan, there's a comment from Greg that talks about your presentation. And if you were to boil down your presentation in talking about greater infrastructure investment, what would you consider the single most important pro and the single largest con to increasing in spending for infrastructure?
I'm not sure what the question actually means, but what I was trying to present was that first of all, you don't want to waste money. You have to have a cost and benefit analysis of the individual projects to make sure that they're going to be on net beneficial. I think the most important thing to realize is that just like the gasoline tax issue, we tend to be going about this in a way that's doesn't use economics very well. We don't have a good appreciation in the nation or at the state of Wisconsin, given the current political climate, to fully assess the role of government in a market system. The market system is actually a beautiful thing when it works, but when it fails spectacularly, as we saw in Texas. And we are doing certain things in the private sector that the public sector should be doing. We are doing some things in the public sector that the private sector should be doing. Foxconn, for example, is a good example of something that should have been left up to the market. The public sector should be providing the infrastructure that's necessary to support the market, and then the market should decide what goes on land like we now have in Mount Pleasant, where the Foxconn thing was supposed to be. There's another question that I could work in here about the corridor, the rail corridor between Milwaukee and Chicago, and then on up to Minneapolis. I mean, this is a priceless resource, absolutely priceless resource. We have freeways, we have rail, we have, but the main thing for both of those is right of way. We could have more passenger trains. We could have later at night and earlier in the morning scheduling for people who could use either city more efficiently. You can't have a business meeting in Chicago and get back to your own home by train. And that could be cured very, very easily. So there are many projects that we've delayed or ignored because of bad economic thinking. And if we could straighten that out, I think the main thing in that regard is for voters, when they go to these town halls, ask these people, what in the world do they know about user charges and basic finance and cost benefit analysis and so on, and ask both parties. Both parties are weak on this. And you get to the point where we have these terrible report cards, largely because the decision makers don't know how to make decisions. And it's costing us dearly at the economic level and at the personal level. And there's another question here about poor people paying user charges. That's a very important question. Most of us should be paying user charges just to get efficiency into the system and to finance these projects. Poor people, we can reimburse them out of the benefit that would come from being more efficient. And how do you do that? Well, we already have rent subsidies. We already have heat reimbursement. And if people have very heavy gasoline taxes, they can report that when they do their income taxes and get a reimbursement. And if they don't pay income taxes, they can simply apply for a credit. But we can't use the poor people as an excuse for the rest of us not paying user charges. And because then we end up with these terrible report cards. All right, sorry, I've gone on longer than I should have. Back to you.
Thank you. Bruce is asking a question about a specific project, and I know that Ken already mentioned that ASC doesn't particularly or will not comment or prioritize on a project level basis when we're talking about infrastructure. But let me see if I can provide some general comments on it. Bruce asks, one of the most controversial proposals and most expensive is reconstructing I-94 next to the Brewers Stadium. How does one do the cost benefit analysis of this? And also the cost and benefits accrue to different people. Is there a way to balance that? I did not work on that project in my engineering career, but I worked on a lot of other different highway projects. And a highway project is a very complex project. It looks like it's just lanes of pavement laying on the ground, but there's a lot of work that goes to getting to that point. We do environmental analysis to look at the runoff that's going to be from there, from generated by the impervious surfaces that are there. We look at traffic projections, not only just the number of vehicles, but the percent trucks. We look at diversion that might occur, that a new highway might attract more traffic. We look at alternate modes of transportation, if there's bus or rail or other transit options available. Bicycle accommodation is part of all projects now. So there's a variety of different things that go into a highway project, including safety aspects, not the least of which we look at the accident history on any segment of road and see if there's anything about the road geometry that can be done to reduce that. So some of the costs that would be associated with that certainly are cost of crashes and injuries, cost of vehicle damage for poor pavement conditions, cost of delay and congestion. Dr. Hullahan mentioned that trucks heavy trucks are the most important factor in deteriorating pavement and bridge life. While that is true, when you look in an area like Southeast, the trucks are using the pavement there and wearing it out, but the cars are occupying space on a limited resource and causing the congestion. So we can't just blame trucks for the infrastructure, but it's also the number of cars that are occupying that space that they should pay the appropriate fees for that. Ken, did I see you pop up? Wanted to answer a question here?
Nope, you're all good.
Okay. We're starting to wrap things up here. If there's more questions you'd like to jump into the Q&A box, please feel free to do so. Just scanning through here. Judith talks about her children that lived in Seattle. They received an incentive from their employer for using public transit or biking to work. What do we think the possibilities of that being implemented in Wisconsin? Anybody on the panel want to jump to that one?
Yeah, Marty, I'll start off with that one. That's a great thing that can be done in lots of communities, especially the biking. Having those incentives by employers, that's typically up to employer by employer basis. But the struggle is, especially when you get outside of the general Milwaukee area or Madison area in the smaller mid-sized metropolitan areas, is the mass transit or public transit is not there. I myself, originally from Milwaukee, now up in the Green Bay area, can attest that it's night and day between the Milwaukee public transportation compared to the Green Bay public transportation. So literally every community in Wisconsin either has a different setup for public transportation or has no public transportation at all, which is a huge struggle point. And, same thing with biking to work, and that Milwaukee and several other communities have great biking trails to get around, but other communities don't. And so that's a huge struggle point. But it would be great for employers to encourage that, because then that could help support the need in the community for the local community to help improve infrastructure for either public transit or biking to work.
Thank you, Ken. Carl, you've gotten off easy. I haven't bounced a question over to you yet. Here comes one. Get ready. So somebody might look at this presentation and say, boy, you guys are just a bunch of engineers. And if we do all these projects, the engineers derive a big benefit of this. How would you respond to that comment?
Well, I think it's like just about anything. If you are really going to research something, and say, for example, you were having health issues, you probably would not go to your plumber to get advice. You'd go to a medical authority to get your advice. With us, with engineers, we are the experts at evaluating this. We've been through all of it before, and we're presenting it as a snapshot in time. I would also like to say that the engineers are only one part of the project team. The project team includes many different contractors, different entities throughout areas where the projects are being completed. You have to remember that it isn't just us that are making the money off of this. It's everyone involved, including the community. Marty, you mentioned before that the national report card came out yesterday. As part of that presentation, they made a comment that they said $1 in infrastructure spending equates to $1.6 for the gross domestic product of the community that is being served. So no matter what you're doing, if you're doing something to improve the infrastructure in a particular area, city, county, whatever, you're getting more dollars back into your economy through the area from going ahead with that project. So that's the way I would, start to answer it. One is the expertise, and the other is, as Bill said before, it really kind of expands out. It isn't just the spending of $1 here. It continues on through the system, and everyone benefits.
Very good. Thanks, Carl. I guess I would just tag on to that. One of the remarks that you made in your introduction of ASCE, too, is that the ASCE Code of Ethics, one of the paramount issues there, or canons, I should say, is to hold paramount the public health, safety, and welfare. So in as much as we are designing projects, that canon applies to us every day. I'd like to wrap things up here now and conclude, but before we get to the conclusion, I would like to ask everyone to complete a short, it is short, it's 19 questions, but they're quick. There's a survey at the conclusion of this webinar, and it should pop up on your screen when you leave the webinar. The League of Women Voters of Wisconsin is going to use the results of that survey to plan future events and learning activities associated with infrastructure in Wisconsin. So to close out the session, I'd like to ask Carol to say a few words. Carol?
Yes, we very much appreciate all of you attending today. We want to thank our presenters, Carl and Bill, for the excellent presentations and the foundation in information about what we're talking about with the infrastructure report card and where we're at, and the economic considerations that we need to think about going forward. But thank you to Carl and Bill for making today possible. Thank you for Marty Hansen for the many contributions you've made to this program. Next slide. We want to thank everyone who asked questions today. One question that I should have responded more fully, and that is, this was supposed to be for Southeastern Wisconsin. We at the League directed our invitations to people in this area. And as we're going forward, people in the Southwest leagues will be inviting people in their area. So there will be different people in the audiences to give us feedback from the various quadrants of the state. Next slide. This slide gives the other 3 quadrants and the dates. And you will be receiving more information about category meetings. We've got 7 scheduled. The authors of the individual category chapters will be giving presentations on the dates, tentative dates given here. And we feel that by the time people participate in each of these category meetings, you will have a far better understanding of the issues related to infrastructure in Wisconsin, and be much better grounded to work with others in your community on individual categories of concern. And the League is offering to help groups around the state to meet, to discuss, decide on priority categories, and reach out to public officials to let them know the concerns in the various parts of the state. Next slide. We have a special thank you to ASCE section planning team members. You've seen Jake, Marty, Ken, Jennifer, Carl on the program tonight. And we thank April Mehring and Impact Association Management for the work that they have done in putting this program together. And our League of Women Voters planning team as well. Some of the questions were, I recognized familiar names: Ann Batiza, Ann Chartier, Louise, Penny Bernard Shaber, Dorothy Skye, Carol Terrell, Deborah Cronmiller, Morgan Vernau. All of these wonderful people have participated in the planning meetings for these meetings. Thank you all.
Thank you, Carol, and thank you all for attending. Just a quick reminder, please complete the survey as you exit the webinar. And also, recording this event will be available soon on the ASCE Wisconsin YouTube channel. Thank you for attending, and have a pleasant evening, and be safe.